everybody. Welcome. Everyone grab a drink. Who's at the bar? Have a seat. Tuck in. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We've got clean air, which is just a wonderful thing. I'm Alex Joyce. I'm a board member of Building a Better Bend, and we're really excited to have you all here this evening, have this discussion. For those of you who don't know, Building a Better Bend is a nonprofit organization that was founded nearly 20 years ago with a mission to bring expert speakers, like those with us tonight, to share their experiences on ways that can positively affect the quality of development and the quality of our community. Many of my fellow board members are in the audience tonight, so I'd invite them to stand up because it takes a village to put these events on. Round of applause. Also, if there's any elected officials in the audience, we want to acknowledge your presence as well. None so far. Okay. So we put on these free annual lecture series. It wouldn't be possible without generous support from our sponsors. Tonight's presenting sponsor is the Bend Chamber. I'd like to welcome Katie Anderson, the board chair of the chamber, to say a few words. Katie?
Thank you. Welcome to Building a Better Bend lecture series. I think this is part 2 of the Housing Solutions for Central Oregon. I'm Katie Anderson. I'm the current chair of the board chamber. I'm the CEO of a peering management group. I'm also one of those rare unicorns that got to grow up in Bend and now gets to live here and raise my family. And I think, like everyone who is a part of these conversations, am fearful that my kids are not going to have that same opportunity to build the life that we've been so privileged to build unless we can solve some of these problems. So the chamber is really excited to continue to support conversations like this. We started our housing initiative as an organization 3 years ago and really started initially trying to gather data on how the housing challenges in Central Oregon were impacting employers. How was it impacting retention? How was it impacting their ability to recruit and retain? And what was the economic impact of some of what was occurring in our community, so we could tie that back to trying to find some solutions to it. So as an organization, Katie Brooks, who is our fearless leader who couldn't be here with us tonight, headed that up with the team, really trying to shape some solutions on housing in that intersection with employers and our community. The other piece that this conversation for the chamber has evolved into, that data led to advocacy. That advocacy led to us identifying some policies that could be implemented to help move some of those solutions forward. And the third piece that we actually just launched last week, and we're really excited to sort of offer as an additional tool, is trying to close some funding gaps to get projects happen. So the Bend Chamber, with our partners, Providence Health Plan and Mid-Oregon Credit Union, have rolled out a revolving loan. The initial loan has been funded through Providence Health Care at $500,000. And we're excited that we got to launch and break ground on the first project in conjunction with Habitat. And we're hoping that we will continue to be able to raise funds into that revolving loan to offer that program as a potential funding gap to help housing projects that need to close the gaps of our affordable solutions here in Central Oregon. So we are really proud to partner with Building Better Bend and sponsor forums like this so we can bring speakers here, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Katie. So when we envisioned this 3-part lecture on housing, which is a pretty widely discussed topic, we were fortunate that 2 of Bend's prominent housing developers stepped up to share the title sponsorship. And they're reflecting their strong commitment to working together to help solve our housing crisis. So please help me thank Hayden Homes and Pahlisch Homes for their generous support of this year's lecture series. So I now have the pleasure of introducing Jason Myrie. Chief Communications Officer at Pahlisch Homes, to say a few words. Jason?
And I'll keep it brief because I know you didn't come here to listen to me. So I will, on behalf of Hayden Homes and Pahlisch Homes, we definitely are proud to be a part of this organization and what you guys are doing with this. And to have the second part of this series, the first part of the series was amazing. Now we have another amazing section here. And I will admit, I did nerd out a little bit. I'm kind of that kid on Christmas that opened up the packages and then retaped them so my mom didn't know because I wanted to see. I didn't want to be surprised. And I went and watched a talk you gave in Edmonton, which was amazing. So hopefully there's a little bit more than that, but you're going to surprise me, right? Okay, good. I'm going to be surprised. And then I nerded out on a symposium that was given on mass timber. And yes, I was the 46th of the 45 viewers on YouTube that watched it, but I just nerded out on it because it's something that we're thinking about as builders, as just how can we be more innovative if we're trying to tackle the houselessness issue, the affordability issue, the sustainability issue. There's a lot coming at builders, and then how do we continue to tackle that? And we have to be open to areas of innovation and design and all that. So tonight I'm going to be nerding out listening to you guys, and we appreciate you guys being here, and we're loving that we're partners in this. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason. The other presenting and supporting sponsors include Ashley Vance Engineering, Pinnacle Architecture, Central Oregon Land Watch, Miller Lumber, Cascadia Partners, Killian Pacific, and the Shearshaw Group. Thank you to each of these fantastic organizations. Additionally, we have a delightfully long list of partners for this year's series, including Project, Walker Macy, Eco Northwest, Palmer Homes, DKS Associates, Dowell, Kittleson Associates, CEA Consulting Engineers, Kelcon, Sunwest Builders, COIC, Hand in Hand Productions, STEMIC Design and Architecture, Tenover Studios, KPFF, First Interstate Bank, and LRS Architects. Thank you all for your support. So, this is the second in our three-part lecture on housing. At Lecture 1, we demystified a lot of the root causes of homelessness. And they're not what you hear in the popular media. It really comes down to a lack of housing. It sounds simple, but as we all know, getting more housing on the ground is one of the more complicated things we can endeavor to do. On October 15th, so coming up, our third lecture, Coming Together for Housing, we'll share real-world success stories, but also battle scars from communities who have come together, built coalitions, overcome resistance, and are starting to build housing for all. So how do we actually put some of this knowledge into practice on the ground here in Bend? But tonight, we want to talk about innovation in housing. And housing impacts every single one of us, whether we're hunting for a home of our own, helping a kid or an aging parent find something that they can afford. We might not always have a perfectly clear idea of what innovation means exactly, but you know what? We are all certain that we need a ton of it, and we need a ton of it right now as a solution. It's an exciting time in the world of housing. The housing crisis has reached the highest levels of the national conversation. Barack Obama just came out as a YIMBY on the stage of the Democratic National Convention. And a central plank of a major party presidential nominee is to build millions of new housing units in a few years. So housing is having a moment. The housing topic has so many different dimensions, and there's innovation occurring on so many different fronts right now. From innovations in construction technology and advanced manufacturing that are going to help us dial up the production volume, to material innovations that are as strong as steel, but also renewable, to market innovations that are reshaping the form and the footprint of housing as we know it to respond to changes in lifestyle and demographics, to legal and regulatory innovations that will allow housing types that are literally illegal to build today in this country be part of our cities of tomorrow. Tonight, we are fortunate to welcome two experts who will talk about a variety of these innovations. Michael Eliason is the founder of Larch Lab, a Seattle-based design firm, an award-winning architect. Michael specializes in mass timber, social housing, Baugruppen, which you'll learn more about tonight, and passive house design. His career is defined by a commitment to innovation, expanding the dialogue around sustainable development, non-market housing, and decarbonized construction. Michael has played a key role in advancing legislative efforts on point access blocks. So those of you who are online, you know what I'm talking about. You'll learn more about that. Across the U.S. and as a founding board member of Seattle's Passive House social housing developer. In addition to his architectural work, he is also an author. He survived writing a book, with his forthcoming book set for publication this fall. Michael. Not quite yet. Just want to give you a hand. I aspire to be an author one day, and I don't know how people survive it. And then we have Mark Fretz, the director of the Institute for Health and the Built Environment at the University of Oregon's College of Design, where he also serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Architecture. The Institute combines design thinking with science and industry partners to create innovative, low-carbon building solutions that promote healthier individuals, communities, and the planet. Mark is a co-principal investigator on research focused on developing panelized flat pack, think IKEA, mass timber systems for affordable, resilient, and energy-efficient missing middle housing, and he's brought some props, which we'll talk about tonight. And he's utilizing advanced manufacturing and biomaterials. First up, let me welcome Michael Eliason.
All right, well, thank you, Alex, and thank you to all of the people who have brought us out here, your support. I've had some really interesting conversations. It's actually my first time in Bend. I've lived in the Northwest for almost 20 years, so I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that your tourism drive did not pull us down earlier, but I wish that it had. My wife grew up in Southern California, and as soon as we came over the mountains in Mount Hood, like the topography, the landscape reminded her of where she was from. She slammed on the brakes. She just ran around in circles outside and was like, smell it. And I'm like, I like the rainy Northwest. Why are you out of the car? You guys have like the bones of a really amazing city. We're fortunate enough to be staying downtown at Ashley and Vance's building. And just being able to bike around and walk around, like the seeds of what I see here are, I think you guys are kind of trying to set yourselves up in a really positive way in the future. And so hopefully you guys can glean a couple of things from our talks tonight and move forward. So tonight, I'm going to talk about the new American Dream, American Dream 2.0, the status quo American dream of buying a detached house and a car and driving everywhere. I think for a lot of people, I have gray hair, but I'm not that old, but for my generation and younger is no longer the reality, right? Like my parents bought a house, it's accumulated a ton of value, they live a very, very nice life, but like even if we can tap into what my parents have, like we're not gonna have those same opportunities in Seattle. And I think in all the conversations we've had around Bend, you guys are seeing a lot of the same things. So these are systemic issues. They're not just related to any one thing, but I want to talk about what I think as some of the solutions and also what are some of the problems. So I'll talk a little bit about climate and community-oriented housing. Oops, sorry, I have two things here, so I try not to look back so much. Okay, so in our cities in the US, we really have two modes of how we do development. Detached houses in quiet neighborhoods off of the street, and then we kind of pack all of our density onto these loud, polluted arterials and highways. And so it sets up this really bifurcated nature in how we live, right? So spatially, economically, sometimes racially, and even at the quality of life. There's a very, very radical differentiation between those kinds of environments. Oops, sorry. And when we try to like introduce missing middle housing, sometimes it works, a lot of times it doesn't. What we're seeing in Seattle is where we thought small apartment buildings would go. We're just getting townhouses everywhere. So there's a carport, there's no open space. If you like trees like I do, there's no trees. If you're elderly, like this isn't accessible. If you have to live in your house and you can no longer climb stairs, well, there's no room for an elevator. Some of these are like 12 feet wide. And so the way we're developing and redeveloping our neighborhoods, we're not really thinking kind of to how we should be living or how things can change. So there's no flexibility in what we're doing either. And I think that's really detrimental. And okay, this building isn't in Bend, but I've seen some of the newer buildings in Bend, and there's kind of this propensity, and it's not just Bend, it's every city now. These massive buildings, heavily capitalized. It doesn't matter if it's market rate or affordable housing. There's kind of the secret reason for this too. There's a couple of different reasons, but there's a big one, is the way that we build housing in the US is a radical departure from anywhere in the rest of the world outside of Canada. Okay, but if we look at the historical development patterns, we can look at in European cities, which as an architect, I'm always drawn to Europe. This is Frederiksberg in Denmark. Okay, let's see if I can get the spotlight to work. Hopefully I don't break it. This is backwards. Wow. Okay, I'm just gonna talk through it. So like these kind of look like different buildings, right? Like it doesn't look like it's one continuous big block. And the reality of how that was developed, those were smaller parcels. Those were individual parcels. Yeah, they have some regulation about the building form, but those are all individual buildings. And so you could have like market rate housing next to a co-op, next to some other fancy whatever you want to do. And so there's a lot of diversity at the block level. Well, Bend's early development patterns are similar to the early development patterns of almost any other US city, where we had these small lots, these narrow lots, and buildings that we're touching. But somewhere along the way, we lost the ability to, as we grow as a city, keep that fine-grained nature, that small-scale urbanism, which I think does a lot of things. It allows for more open space, it allows for more community, better streets, better built environment, right? Like your downtown Bend is smaller, it's shorter than this, right? But like the nuts and bolts are there. Oh, sorry. And so when we do development in the US, that went the wrong way. Oh, I'm so sorry. I gotta track this better. Right, so like you guys have, like it's the bones are there. It's the same kind of fine-grained nature. When we do redevelopment in the US now, we don't get these smaller buildings at the same block level. These all look different because this is modern development in Germany. This is Heilbronn, the Neckarbogen Eco District. At the block level, there's the taller building is mass timber. There's student housing, there's social housing, there's market rate housing, there's workforce housing. So even at the block level, you're getting this radical mixing. It's a big departure from what we see here in the US, where you have one massive building taking up half or all of a block. Maybe there's affordable housing, maybe there's some token affordable housing units, but we don't get that mixing. And so I think we really have to be rethinking about how we design our buildings and the unit access for these buildings. Okay, this sounds really dumb. We'll come to why. But I think it affects social connectivity. We have a huge loneliness crisis. It's only gonna get worse. Climate adaptation, it's got connections with that. And just in terms of like having better quality housing, how do we really do that? Okay, so in our multi-story apartment buildings, there are really three forms of vertical access. So far right, double-loaded corridor, this is what you see everywhere. It's like living in a hotel. Corridor down the middle and units on either side. Single-loaded corridor, you just have one corridor at the end. But the one on the far left is the workforce housing the world over outside of the US and Canada. It's the point access block. It just has one stair. So the double-loaded corridor comes out of archaic building regulations in the US, which at the time made sense. We didn't have sprinklers. We didn't have we had a volunteer fire department. We didn't have a professional fire department. And so we would have a corridor that connected to two stairs, and all the units would have access to that. You get moderately efficient, floor plates. But like if you're living on a loud side of the street, right, there's no way to escape that noise. If it's facing southwest and it's hot in the sun, we don't do shading here on the outside of the building, so you can't really escape the heat that well. There's no cross ventilation. It's really difficult to get family-sized units to pencil out in these buildings too, because you've got like a 3-bedroom unit taking up the space of 4 studios, right? And so the economics of it are really wonky as well. And just a quick example, right? You guys have all seen something like this. It's all studios, it's all 1-bedrooms. They have a window at the end. It's like living in a bowling lane. And then only at the corners are you able to really do anything different, get like an extra bedroom or light on 2 sides. Single-loaded corridor was really common in like the 60s and 70s. A lot of people think of like a motel. It's really common in a lot of social housing and innovative projects in Europe, but it's not super efficient from the floor plate side, right? And so we don't see a lot of these in the US. I think there's also some cultural issues as well, but you do have the ability to cross-ventilate. You do get daylight on multiple sides. There's some really innovative stuff you could do with that. And then just here's a really simple plan. The galley on top, it's a balcony. It's how you access all of the units. But then you can see like all of these units have daylight on multiple sides. There's a variety of unit sizes. So there's like a lot of stuff going on that we don't see in the US on these projects. But the point access block is really the workhorse of urban housing in Asia, in South America, in Europe, but not in the US. So like I said, it's one stair with a couple of units sprinkled around it. This does some really interesting things. It allows us to use space for apartment rather than circulation, so we get more efficient floor plates. We have limitations on the number of units that can access the stair core, so that kind of helps us maximize for family-sized units because we don't have as much room to utilize as you would with like a double-loaded corridor building. So we get these super compact buildings. They're very efficient. Most of the units, and sometimes all of the units, can cross-ventilate. You can put bedrooms on quiet sides of the street, right? So it's like it's already a different way from the kind of typical mode of how we do things in the US. So everything in green here, you can go 6 stories or higher with a single stair building. Everything in yellow, that's 3 stories, that's the US, that's most of the US. Seattle, New York City, and Honolulu allow up to 6 stories. And then Canada is 2. They have a process right now to get up to 6 stories in British Columbia. That's going through their legislative process. So you can start to see, like, we're kind of this weird anomaly. And I think the way that we build is directly driven by this, and it has a number of knock-on effects. So thinking about, like, how we dwell in these buildings. Can we have daylight on multiple sides? Do we have the ability to cross-ventilate? Can we get, like, studios and 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and family-sized units? These are 3-bedroom units on the end with daylight on 3 sides. It's a good substitute for living in like a detached house, right? Like you don't see that in US construction. One of the other great things that this allows us to do is have thinner buildings. Now, I don't talk about this a lot, but I think thinner buildings are like the key to why urbanism in the US and the EU is so different, right? We have these big, thick buildings because our units are also big and thick. And so we don't have as much room for courtyard space. We don't have these elegant, large kind of courtyards that you see in other places, but there are also knock-on effects. So same number of bedrooms on the left and the right. Left is a point access block, single-stair building. The right is a double-loaded corridor. 7 bedrooms. The point access block requires 1,000 square feet less to get the same amount of bedrooms. So that means there's less costs, less embodied carbon, less materials that need to be purchased, more open space. And then you get a little bit better units. You've got the end units, if they're free-flowing, have daylight on at least 3 sides. If not, if you kind of mirror it, you've got at least 2 sides, and you don't get that on the other kind of the US building. And we see this other issue in the US where the buildings that we're building are getting larger and larger. So even 25 years ago, blue line, most of those were buildings that were 30 units and less. You can see even before the 2008 crash, those just dropped off a cliff. The green line is buildings with more than 50 units. These large, heavily capitalized buildings that take up half or more of a block have steadily become the overwhelming majority of buildings in the US. And I think we're also starting to see the limitations of this. This is a massive double-loaded corridor in Seattle. It takes up a whole block. We can do a 50-foot dead-end corridor, right? So if there's a fire right here, how do these units get out, right? This could be more units in an entire single-stair building. So that's a little bit scary. And then like the courtyard, there's no room, there's no privacy in the courtyard. You have 1 window, it's 25 feet, 35 feet from another unit. It's kind of like living in a fishbowl. So our codes are really driving this inability to do this fine-grained urban development that I think a lot of us want, and that we go to other places, we go to Europe, we go to South America, Mexico City, that we see everywhere. And what we'll do is we'll play these games with these massive buildings, right? We'll say, okay, let's pop the facade out, we'll modulate a few things, maybe we'll do like 8 different materials or colors, and people won't think it's the same building. It's the same building. We all know it's the same building. But like in other countries where they allow that fine-grained development, you get that mix of uses. You get these differentiated buildings. And so our building codes, it's not just zoning codes, our building codes are heavily regulating and inducing the kinds of development that we get in the US. So in the US, if this block were being redeveloped, because of our requirements, everything is going to be the big orange block that wipes out all of the neighborhood. With smarter building codes, with better building codes, you can have this like piecemeal, fine-grained replacement of like individual buildings, and so it grows more naturally. Another aspect of all this is what it does to the spaces, the units inside them. This is a big part of what we do at Large Lab. So we have these big, deep buildings with these big, deep floor plates, windows only on one side, maybe 2 if you're lucky and you live on the corner, but we have to fill it in with more space, more walk-in closets, multiple bathrooms, right? And so this isn't really like living with a family. This is like living in a really, really big hotel with a lot of stuff to clean and stuff to put away. So that's 970 square feet for the 2-bedroom. In the European context, that's going to be a decent 3-bedroom home. You can get 2 bathrooms in it. The orientation of your kitchen, living, dining becomes parallel to the facade. So you have better daylight, you have more windows. It's much more conducive to, I think, that substitute of living in a detached home. Plus, you can put your bedrooms on the opposite side of the building. So if you're on a noisy street, you can sleep on the quiet courtyard, right? So it's a radical departure from the way that we've been developing cities. And then we start to layer in all of these other issues. Climate crisis. I got a hint of the smoke this morning, and I have this little PTSD bug that every time the wildfire smoke comes back, I'm 2019, sitting at home, work from home, kids are home, doing homeschooling, pandemic, and then like wildfire smoke came in for like 2 weeks, and it was like we couldn't leave the house, and it was like, I need to leave the house. So we have this new reality of how do we deal with not just hotter extremes, but also like wildfire smoke and all these other issues. So when we're planning our cities, are we taking this into account? Are we thinking about like urban morphology and how things are going to heat up? Our building codes, our energy codes are based on historic data. A lot of that is irrelevant. So our buildings were designed for a climate that no longer exists. I looked it up for Bend, you guys to the arrow on the far left. Your climate could effectively become that of northern Arizona. Could be interesting. And so we have this problem. We need to deal with healthier homes, climate-adaptive homes. We need more affordable homes. We need family-friendly homes. We need more community-oriented housing. So our solution was LARIX, which is larch in Latin. LARIX is a Baugruppe. This is a building where people come together and self-develop their own middle-class housing. So it's not developer-led project. It can be developer co-led, but it's really the people who are living in it who are going to design or work with an architect to design their building and develop it. It's pretty common in Germany now. They're expanding into other countries as well, the Netherlands, Austria, and so forth. But the age diversity that you see on this is not something that you would tend to see in a lot of U.S. buildings. There's families, there's young kids, there's multi-generational stuff going on. So it's really about values. It's about building kind of around an orientation of we want to have only family-friendly homes, or we want LGBTQ-friendly homes. We're going to choose the most sustainable housing we can build, and this is the approach that I think that we can start to get there. So it's housing without developers. I'm not anti-developer. I understand there's a place for development and developers, but I'm a big fan of alternative forms of housing. The way that Baugruppen work, it's everyone comes together. They use their network and basically form an LLC. It could be a cooperative as well. It's their own legal entity, and they're developing a project. There's no developer profit in Seattle. That's anywhere between 15 to 25% of a project. You don't have to deal with marketing costs. Everyone is already in-house. You do have to deal with project management, but it's really about shared amenities. You can have sorry, my mind is doing a complete blank right now. You can have a guest room, right? And that guest room is used by everybody. During COVID, it becomes the pandemic isolation room. When you have a teenager who you don't want in the house anymore, it becomes the teenage room. When you have an elderly resident who can't take care of themselves anymore, it becomes the place where the live-in nurse goes, right? So it's about like this flexibility that we don't see in the rigidity of the way that we're currently building. And in Germany, a lot of jurisdictions will prioritize it. They'll hold lands. They have shops at the city department that can help facilitate these kinds of groups. And we said, okay, look, the typical development, we're going to max out the lot that we're allowed to build. It's mostly going to be 1-bedroom units, maybe some studios. If you're lucky at the corners, you get a 2-bedroom. We said, look, we're going to change this. We're going to do the maximum test of what we can do for a single-stair building, and we can do 2 single-stair conditions per lot, only family-sized housing, sorry. All right, so we have 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, house A mirrored house B. And this is kind of where we ended up. All of the bedrooms are on the quiet side of the building. It's not as thick as the previous building, so there's more open space. There's also more privacy to the adjacent lot. All the kind of common spaces, kitchen, living, dining, are on the louder street. They're all oriented to have a lot more daylight. Right, so the bedrooms, quiet side of the building. And lo and behold, we have the ability to cross-ventilate. So when it's too hot out, if we don't want to run the air conditioner, we can just open windows on either side. if the power goes out, which we're going to see more of thanks to climate change, you at least have some ability to cool off in your building that you don't see in a kind of the status quo development in the U.S. Also allowed us to get more varied unit mix, so all family-sized housing, but we could have flats on the upper floors and then maisonettes, which are two-story units that are accessible to the exterior, ground level. So families could have the option of, only living on a flat with a balcony or having a ground-oriented unit, which you see on some bigger projects. Vancouver does a lot of towers with townhomes around it, but not at this scale. And then really driving home this question of how can we make this climate adaptive? Are we doing passive house? Can we do mass timber? What are other options that we can do to make this building as light on the earth and have as low an impact as possible? And passive house, I think, is this leverage that kind of starts to tie all of these other issues together. Like I said, wildfire smoke, this is a block or two off of a major arterial. This is a filter and a HRV, heat recovery ventilator. It's like the lungs of a passive house building that they change about every month because the pollution from the cars is so bad. So this is what we're breathing if you live near a highway. When you put housing only on a highway, it's toxic. It's public health implications as well. That airtight construction, not only does it keep some of those particulates out, it also keeps air drafts and mold and spiders out as well. It kind of induces this better quality, this quality that we saw in European buildings. Mass timber, I'll let Mark talk about it, but to me, it's this great equalizer in doing fabrication and tying cities and rural areas back together. There's a really elegant story there. My default for building decarbonization, straw. I think you guys know what straw is. I've seen some straw bales on the drive over here. In Europe, they're building prefab, panelized, passive house certified straw panels. There's some companies in the US who are starting to make this as well. But it's how can we have these great, elegant, carbon negative buildings? So we need to be rethinking scale and quality as well. Height is good for me, but I like smaller buildings. This is a 4-story, 4-unit building, 2 maisonette units, so 2 units on the left, 2 units on the right, and there's an upper unit and a lower unit. So it's 4 stories, but the units are a little bit more kind of varied and interesting. And then we can go even higher and do kind of the same thing. 6 stories, 10 units. This is a really elegant development in Tübingen in Germany. It's in a mixed-use district, so the ground floor all had to be retail space or office space or other things. What's the quality of those spaces in those units? Do we have private outside terraces? Do we have deep and generous and functional balconies, or do we have bolt-on Juliet balconies that people can't use? In Seattle, it's all the Juliet balconies, and no one uses them. You can't do anything. You can't sit on them. Can you get a combination of all 3? Terrace, balcony, roof deck. Can we bring back sloped roofs and live in the attic like you see in a lot of European contexts? Our house in Bayern was like this, and I enjoy kind of the intimacy of this, and also having a view if you're fortunate enough. It's about ditching driveways, and so many of our missing middle type housing are very auto-centric, and as a dad with 2 young kids who doesn't own a car, I don't understand this context. I'm not anti-car, I know that we need cars, but where do they go is always the big question. But can we redesign our neighborhoods so that they're people-centric, right? So that you can run into your neighbors as you're coming back from the store instead of just in a car. Can we have these lush, semi-private garden courtyards where we're kind of separated? We're within yelling distance at our neighbors. Hey, John, come over, let's grab a beer. We're going to barbecue at 3. But you still have kind of your own intimate terrain. And on even larger ones, right? You can have the private terrace, the balconies on the building frontage, and then these larger kind of communal shared green spaces, activated spaces that we just don't get with the small courtyards in the buildings that we're doing. So this issue of quality is paramount, right? This is every apartment building in Seattle now. Oh, no, actually, I take that back, because this has a bedroom, and most in Seattle don't actually have a bedroom. It's a studio, so you got to add a bed in there as well. Right? So this is tunnel vision. This is dark, deep units. But this is the reality of multifamily housing in a lot of European countries. It's a substitute for a detached home. It's bright. It's airy. So does that substitute for you as a detached home? If you're looking for housing, do you want to live in that, or you want to live in a single-family home? Well, it's okay, I don't want one window at the end of a long hall. I want a flat that has better daylight and access to the exterior and daylight on multiple sides and a place where my kids can be quiet and I can't hear them. But the reality of where our building codes are going in the US and development is windowless bedrooms. We have 2 and 3 bedroom units with no windows in the bedrooms, and there's 1 or 2 windows at most. So we have these deep, dark units, and they're only going to get deeper and darker, and we're not really doing anything to constrain that. But we really should be thinking about wider and shallower units. I'd live here. I think a lot of you would probably live here too if it was an option. So the fundamental question for me is, how do our codes affect quality of life? Every time I go into a double-loaded corridor, this is the image that comes into my mind, and I'll never shake it, and I find it just as terrifying. But this is what stairways look like in countries that allow single-stair buildings. They're day-lit, they're communicative. You run into your neighbors as you're going up and down the stairs. It's a radically different way of living. And then how do we take this idea and just kind of quickly scale it up into something that's, more affordable and more facilitating of a low-carbon life? Can we develop eco-districts full of mass timber, passive house, market rate, and social housing that's park-oriented? It's not necessarily focused on a highway or an arterial. It's got open space, it's got kindergartens, it's got pedestrianized streets, it's got a school campus so the kids don't have to go far to go to school. This is Vienna's Sonnenviertel. It's 20 homes for 20,000, jobs for 15,000. Right? None of these buildings are over 10 stories. It's all relatively mid-rise kind of way of life. Where's Peter? This is Rieselfeld in Vauban. This is not too far from where my wife lived when we met in Freiburg. You have these large blocks with lots of small buildings. There's way more green here than you would see on like a typical U.S. block. It's tram-oriented development. It's not oriented around cars. And again, it's a radical departure from kind of some of the things that we're doing. And they've layered in other stuff. How do we buffer the noise from the adjacent highway so that the people who are closest to the highway can sleep at night so that they don't have any sound that's over 55 decibels coming into their place at night? How do we ensure that there's fresh air coming into the district as well? They take a lot of these things into account in their planning. And so it's about streets for people. There's still space for cars, but going perpendicular to the image, right? There's bollards and there's separation, and this is like the people's street, and the cars have their street, and only in very few places do they meet. And so what I want to leave with you is, this is inner courtyard from Rieselfeld, the big aerial I just showed. Our codes actually prevent this from being legal, right? These are small buildings, social housing, market rate housing, these wonderful paths that kind of meander between all of the blocks without being on even the major arterials, which are still relatively car light. Like our codes, our fire codes, our building codes, our land use codes are not designed or figured to allow these kinds of places to happen. And so I just finished up a book for Island Press on this, Building for People, launches December of 2024. This goes way into depth on all of these topics. So if you have more questions, definitely reach out. I'm here all night. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mark.
I think that presentation was definitely worth a mic drop, so that was terrific. Well timed. So, good evening, everybody. 1 second, I'm going to pull up my presentation here. Terrific. So, it's terrific being with you tonight. I used to live in Central Oregon about 20 years ago, so it's great being back in beautiful Bend, Oregon. Here we go. As Alex mentioned, I co-direct the Institute for Health in the Built Environment together with Professor Siobhan Rockcastle, and the Institute is focused on health at multiple scales. So health of individuals and buildings, but also the health of communities in which buildings are situated, and the health of the planet. So I'll direct you just to our website, buildhealth.uoregon.edu, if you have questions about some of the research that we do. But we have 3 labs that are part of the Institute: Energy Studies and Buildings Lab, which focuses on a lot of energy concerns, passive heating and cooling, daylighting, ventilation. Baker Lighting Lab, which focuses on lighting, and our Biology in the Built Environment Center that focuses on indoor microbiomes, so something completely different. For the project I'm presenting tonight, I'm going to try and navigate both of these screens. I want to first acknowledge the project team. We have a fantastic project team that's been working on this mass ply flat pack house for about 4 years now. My colleague, Professor Judith Shine, is the PI of this project. She directs design at the Tallwood Design Institute, which is a collaboration between the University of Oregon and Oregon State, where we work together to investigate mass timber and develop solutions for mass timber applications. And then Jason Stinson and Dale Northcutt in our Energy Studies and Buildings Lab have been part of this prototype fabrication this summer together with me at Oregon State. And we've had a great group of engineers led by Professor Michael Gershfeld of Cal Poly Pomona, and then Matthew Slazis, Michael Wagoner, Scott Briney, and grad students Simone O'Halloran, Kate Lau, Yasha Curry, and Karen Britton. And then finally, the great team at Emerson Lab, which is the mass timber lab at University, Oregon State University, led by technical manager Phil Mann and Mark Garrick and Byron Miyamoto, who worked with us on this project. So I want to give a shout out to them. So I also want to acknowledge that this project was made possible with generous funding by the EDA as part of a Build Back Better regional challenge. We are part of the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition, which is also including Oregon State and the University of Oregon, but also the Port of Portland, Business Oregon, Oregon Department of Forestry, and Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. So they gave us funding to develop a couple of prototypes for what we've been working on, which I'll show you tonight. As Michael pointed out, we have significant challenges that we need to overcome. We've got climate issues, we've got these converging crises of homelessness, health, social isolation, and of course wildfires, which we're experiencing right now. And we believe that we can't focus only on individual challenges. We need to think about this systematically and develop solutions for these issues that are really considering all of these scales together. So the work that we're doing at the Institute is really trying to reconcile these scales of health. One of the ways that we believe that this could be approached is through new zoning code that's been now adopted in Oregon, House Bill 2001, that allowed us to start exploring alternate models here in Oregon, including cottage cluster housing. So cottage cluster housing is something we've been focusing on to try and get to workforce housing or missing middle housing that targets 80 to 120% area median income for those households. And we think there are opportunities to really reduce some of the impacts of housing and come up with some innovative ideas through this model. So some of those might include peer-to-peer energy, renewable energy sharing on sites that could be adopted when you develop multiple homes at once, especially when you preserve legacy trees on site, district energy, just district heating and cooling strategies, district water reuse. So multiple things that could be considered, and we have been considering those, but I won't focus on all those tonight other than to bring up that we need to really consider the holistic picture here when we're working on these projects. So forests are amazing carbon machines. They take carbon dioxide out of the air and transform it into bio-based products. We believe that transferring the carbon from these products into the built environment through durable products, through long-term storage solutions can help reduce carbon in the atmosphere and build lower carbon buildings and cities. So what we've been focused on in particular to do this is engineered wood products. And engineered wood products can include many different products. Many are familiar already in the single-family housing market. We use a lot of plywood, OSB, LVL. Those are typically known. But we are focused on mass timber and thinking about how that subset of wood products could be used for the same market. So mass timber includes things like CLT, which is composed of small dimensional logs that are turned 90 degrees from each other and bound together, typically with adhesive. DLT, which is wood held together with dowels. NLT, which is wood held together with nails into large panels. And mass ply panels, which is a veneer product that is held together with glue and forms very large panel sizes. So some of the panels can be nominally 12 feet wide by 48 feet long and up to a foot thick. And I have a couple of samples over here tonight of some thinner products, which you can come take a look at afterwards. So I apologize, this next graphic may be a little bit small, but what are the advantages of mass timber? Well, mass timber has many advantages, and as an engineered wood product, it can form this new backbone for advanced manufacturing because we have these large panels that are created. We have the opportunity to use CNC advanced manufacturing using computer-controlled milling of these products, which can be done off-site. It also allows us to use trees that sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and then combining that with even a wood fiber insulation, move a lot of that carbon into the built environment. And the material can improve forest health and revitalize a wood products industry, especially creating linkages more between rural and urban communities. So those are some of the benefits. In addition to the occupants, it's naturally biophilic, and there are antimicrobial properties of wood. So those are just a few. So what I'll be talking about in particular will be the mass ply panel. The mass ply panel is a product that's been developed by Freres Engineered Woods with support from the Tallwood Design Institute and the state of Oregon. So it's a local product. And again, this is a product that can be made at sizes that are up to 48 feet by 12 feet by a foot thick nominally, so very large panels. A big advantage of this product is that it can be made from trees down to 5 inches in diameter. So from small diameter trees that otherwise would have really no or low market value, and can be produced from healthy forest initiatives. So we also like the fact that this can be produced in very thin sections, where some of the domestically available CLT and other mass timber products are much thicker. This can be produced down to 2 inches thick, and so we're using the 2-inch and 3-inch versions to really reduce fiber in single-family homes and try to get into the affordability targets that we're trying to get to with the workforce housing. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the design. We've been focused on the design of this as kind of a concept house initially, really thinking through the issues of designing with this panelized product for this market. So our team really began to rethink all of this again about 4 years ago. And this started with working with Milwaukee and with Cascadia Partners. I think this is back in 2018 or 19. Looking at the cottage cluster code after House Bill 2001 was passed and how that would change or how it could change to really be updated to allow better development in the city of Milwaukee. And so there were a few test lots that were used in Milwaukee, and we explored those lots with this concept of using mass ply panel and how we could really optimize that panel. And with that report in hand, Professor Shine led a couple of design studios at the University of Oregon. We got a lot of students thinking about this, and we came up with basically a simple floor plan for a 2-story home. This is the first floor on the left. Let's see if I can use this fancy. I guess I'm going to have a difficult time using this fancy thing too. Okay, no laser pointer. But basically a simple plan that has bike storage when you come in. It's a powder room downstairs with kitchen, dining, and living open. And then upstairs, 2 bedrooms and a bath, a hall closet. So really a simple floor plan that was really developed with 3 primary factors. One, we wanted to optimize the MPP wood fiber. We wanted to really use this efficiently so we wouldn't have excessive costs with waste. And so the size, which is 16 feet by 24, was developed because the panels are 48 feet long. We could cut them in half and really use it efficiently. So that was one driving factor. Another factor was really trying to optimize the size for the cottage cluster code that was being developed by the city of Milwaukee. And we worked back and forth with the city planning department to try and test some of these things on the site with what they were proposing to change. And they had some rules such as 6-foot spacing or 5-foot setbacks from the side yards and the rear of the lot. So we were able to configure this in a way to really maximize land use. So that was another way we worked through, I think, literally hundreds of iterations on this. And then the third one was the opportunity to use this plan in multiple configurations. So could we use this as a single detached unit or as a duplex or as a potential multifamily row house? So here you can see how those three plans might work out. We again, studied the single, the duplex, and the multifamily. There were advantages and disadvantages of each of those. The detached, actually allowed us to get the most units on site. Strangely enough, when we did that, we were able to squeeze in a few extra while still preserving a lot of the legacy trees on the sites that we explored. It doesn't have a shared wall, so you don't have some of the fire ratings, but you also you don't have as great of energy use, energy efficiency because of that. The duplex actually was more consistent with the massing of single-family homes in the neighborhood. We like the duplex a lot. The shared wall had some fire and acoustic issues that needed to be overcome. So that was one where we were looking at maybe a framed wall and not the mass plywood panel for that application. But at the time, Milwaukee didn't allow that duplex in their cottage cluster model, which they now do. But the row house is something we explored, and in addition to those same issues of the duplex, there are multifamily code requirements for additional fire requirements that actually caused us to need to use more wood fiber, and that for us was kind of a non-starter for the cost issue. So we went back and explored the detached one a little bit more in what I'll show you coming up. So this is one of the lots we studied that you can see here on the bottom. The report, first of all, is very good. This is Milwaukee Cottage Cluster Analysis Final Report from 2019. I encourage you all to take a look at it. But this particular report suggested there could be 11 units on this lot. And then we had our units, which we laid out, which indeed we got 11 units. You can see here we preserved legacy trees. We created a nice central courtyard space with this unit configuration for that same lot. And then we tested an 80-foot by 300-foot deep lot. We found that with this potential design, we could get up to 15 homes on that same lot, which previously had one single-family house. And so this is, of course, using strictly using this single detached unit, but it could have a combination of the ones we've come up with. So we studied how could we deliver this. There are different ways we could prefabricate the housing. There's the volumetric module, which is a module that gets created in a factory. The walls and all the finishings get created, and I think a lot of you have probably seen those going down the road. That's one typical way to do it. Another way is just to ship a kit of parts to the site, and you assemble those parts on site. The parts get prefabricated. And then the third way is to really kind of have a kit of parts of panels that you prefabricate with cladding and insulation and windows in a factory, and then those get shipped to the site as kind of the IKEA model, the flat pack model, and get put together on site. And there are disadvantages and advantages of each of those. One of the disadvantages for these tighter sites is that volumetric modules may not always be a great fit for some of these smaller sites, right? And so you have to have access. And you can see here that they maybe should have bought an IKEA sofa in this image and come in with the kit of parts. So that's one challenge. The other, as we were advised by William Silva of Swinnerton Builders when we were initially starting out exploring this, that hey, you guys don't want to ship air down the road, that you're going to spend money to ship air, so we should really consider the flat pack model. So we really decided to go all in on the flat pack model and started exploring how these kit of parts could go, whether we would assemble the panels with windows and doors and wood fiber insulation, all of that off-site, or not, is something we've been exploring a little bit more, and I'll show that coming up here. The next issue is just really how to assemble that kit of parts. And it's not trivial, it turns out. There are a lot of ways you can do it. So this is an example of that kind of front facade with the entry door and the windows on the left. Well, you can put that together in a number of different ways. You can, for instance, take a big panel and cut out holes for your window and your doors using the CNC machine. But then you're left over with those pieces that you cut out that you need to do something with, right? So you have to make sure that you can use that efficiently. Otherwise, you have waste. It turns out when we did the home we designed with that model, we got about 25 parts that we had to put together, right? So that meant, okay, labor. We also were trying to think about the parts that we cut out being no bigger than 8 foot for shipping down the road. The other way to do it is you can use panels where you assemble those panels to create your openings, right? So they're like bigger pieces that go together. You get more wood fiber efficiency that way. You're not cutting out a big hole and having something left over you have to do something with. But the issue there is you get more parts, right? And then there's more assembly, and you got to figure out how to do that. So there's potentially more labor involved. So these were some of the issues that we've been working through. You can see at the Emerson lab, we did some testing of the walls. This is the CNC machine testing some wood fiber insulation, how we might even bond a rigid wood fiber insulation to the panel and then use that CNC to cut out the parts and be more efficient with fewer hands needing to touch that. And then you can see on the far right, which we assembled those panels with windows and lifted them and tried to erect them on a mock-up we did there to test how that workflow could go a little bit more. So here you see the difference between, for instance, a light wood frame section and a mass plywood panel section where there's a window. And there are some significant differences. The light wood frame panel has a lot more parts when you put a window in. You've got to create a rough opening. You've got to case it. You've got to add trim. That one has drywall. You've got a lot of other things you've got to deal with. In the mass plywood panel one that we've developed, it's very simple. There's no drywall. The wood is the finish. The wood actually hosts the window in a rabbeted opening, and then the insulation is all on the exterior and kind of wraps that like a warm coat to provide a good thermal barrier. And you can see that in the mock-up up here if you want to come take a look later on. That provides some energy benefits, some thermal benefits. This is a CLT wall that we've looked at actually on the left. This is not MPP, but they behave similarly. And you can see there's a really even thermal gradient across the solid portions of the wall, the mass timber wall. It provides a good insulative backing for screws that go in there. You don't see the thermal bridging. It provides fewer openings that you need to deal with for infiltration. So the one on the right is this sample up here. You can see it's very similar with that wood on is providing the structure and the finish, and then your insulation is outside of that. We looked at ways in which we could use a low-cost window. As much as we'd like to use the expensive wood windows from Europe that are tilt-turn, we didn't have that in the budget. So we've got a low-cost window that we've decided to try and upgrade its thermal performance using the plywood panel itself to insulate the frame of the window. So we rabbeted out the outside of the window, and the frame actually sits within the plywood so that you can see on the right, the plywood provides some insulative barrier against that frame. And then we developed what my colleague Judith Shine calls an energy shutter, which is a sliding polycarbonate twin wall shutter. Let's just say that it provides extra insulation at night and privacy as well. So that's kind of all integrated into one thing. We want these homes to be resilient, especially here on the West Coast where we have a seismic issue. The material is much stiffer than a light wood framed house. So during a seismic event where a light wood frame house will sway, because these are so stiff, we have to provide places where the panels can move. So our engineers developed a system that uses these threaded rods that drop through to act like rubber bands and allow the wall to rock during a seismic event. In fact, I don't show that here, but they've also developed basically a seismic fuse that can be easily replaced from the interior in this condition after an event, so the house is immediately reoccupiable. So that's important as we really want our communities to be more resilient in the face of all the challenges that we've got. Okay, so here's the prototype that we've been developing. This is hot off the press. I just took these images. Actually, Marcus Kaufman of the Oregon Department of Forestry and Dan Bin took these images last week. So this is at the Emerson Lab in Corvallis. Our team has been here all summer putting this together, really testing this first version. So you can see how this goes together. In fact, so this is a time-lapse image, obviously, but it takes about a day to put this whole house together, all these parts together. So it goes together very rapidly once the parts are cut by the CNC machine and ready to go. And you can see it's just you start with the bottom and just pieces go together very simply. And I'll show a few more of those here in the next few slides. So before the panels are lifted into position, they are assembled together using these steel plate connections, which you see on the right. Because we were still designing the panels after the panels were cut, we never stopped designing. Because we were still doing that, we had to do a lot of these operations by hand. So you can see there's a mortise joint that has to happen there, and this is being done by hand, although this could also be automated in the future. So we have these special dowels that are self-tapping dowels that cut through the quarter-inch steel plate. And we were worried, because we had quite a few of these to place, that they would take too long. But this is real time, and we've tested a bunch of them. They all take about, on average, 10 seconds to drill through and place. So they actually go much faster than we thought to go through that steel. Yeah, we're focused on a lot of time for this, right? So this is a big piece of what we're looking at. So we have steel angles that hold these together. And I mentioned before that part of what we were exploring is whether we assemble these with cladding and insulation and windows in the factory or not. And if we do that, we have to make all the connections on the interior versus the exterior. So we decided to go that route, thinking we would prefabricate the panels. And that meant that we have steel angles that have the connections on the interior of the home, which required some pockets to place those angles. Again, this is an operation that could be done by a smaller contractor without access to a CNC machine, as we did here, or it could be automated with a CNC machine. You can see my colleague Dale Northcutt drilling the holes here precisely for the straps that hold the seismic straps, and you can see the steel angles on the right. We used 1/16 of an inch tolerances for this house, and so that was another test. Can we use those tolerances in this model, in this digital twin model that we were using? Can we use that and actually put this thing together or not? Would we need to cut a lot of things in the field? I was skeptical that we would be able to put this together. I thought there's going to be a lot of things that come up. We need more tolerances, but actually it worked brilliantly. I have to say, there's one issue we had which was unrelated to the tolerances here, and I'll show that coming up. But even that hole was within 1/16 of an inch. So they were high tolerances. Here you see there's the steel angles that are laid out, getting ready to be mounted. For an all-wood house, there's still a lot of steel, unfortunately. We're trying to still reduce that in the next version. And now the panels are ready to go. They have the angles mounted on them. We're putting them into place, and they go together, again, very rapidly. You can see here on the left that the floor plate is only 3 inches. That is something to note, because we were really trying to reduce the overall height of this to be able to get the units into ADU spaces and into the 5-foot setback by having a much lower height of the building. So that thinner floor plate actually helped us reduce the overall height for some of these tighter sites. So this is a real-time image or video here of my colleague Jason Stinson placing the end wall. These things articulate really nicely with the steel angles in place, and it just drops into place. It's really actually that quick. So once the walls are in place, they get shored, and then these self-tapping wood fasteners are really quick to zip into the steel angles, again, making the connections from the interior. So we placed a lot of those just with impact drivers, and they go quite quickly. Another thing we wanted to look at is, could we fabricate a stair without any measuring? Could we take our digital model and have it precisely cut all the holes for the stair tread angles? And would it take a craftsperson, or could we do it? And it turns out that we could do it, and it was quite simple. So we have the CNC template, holes get pre-drilled, the steel angles get placed, and the stair treads go on extremely easily. And I have to say, my colleague was very skeptical, and he was ready with his framing square. He was like, no, I don't think we're going to have to do this. I said, no, let's just try it. And it worked out. So that was another design issue that we wanted to test. Another thing we can do with these mass plywood panels is we can easily make these skylight boxes, which we did, that have these compound cuts. So we decided to use a very small skylight for cost, number one, but also number two, to reduce thermal gain and have optimal daylighting, especially in tight sites where privacy might be an issue or where you might not have enough space between units to get good daylighting. We used a lot of top lighting. And then they were also operable Velux units for passive stack ventilation. But this box, we thought we were going to make this out of 1-inch plywood and create some jigs. And I just said, let's just try it. My colleague suggested 3-inch MPP, which we had left over. And I said, let's just try a model quickly in the digital twin. And we cut it on the CNC machine, and it went together extremely fast. And you can see these getting dropped into place. Part of the aesthetic that we're going with is just using the 20 millimeter burr as part of the finish. So you can see these radii in the house that are just part of the aesthetic. We leave that ingrained exposed. There's no casing around the windows. The windows, as you can see on the right, sorry, the pointer probably won't work again. No, it won't. But you can see the rabbet here around that window where the window frame sits into that. And because these are so precise, that window opening, the rough opening is square. We have a 1/16 of an inch tolerance. All the windows for this house went in under an hour. So, and we had students helping us. I mean, it really was that easy. So it's extremely precise. It doesn't take a craftsperson to do some of these windows. We used that 2-inch MPP for interior walls, and it actually gave us more square footage because it's a much thinner wall section, right? And we then used the MPP, that 2-inch MPP, to create the interior doors. And we thought, can we do this inexpensively in just a simple, elegant way? And we found this pivot and ball latch hardware together on the internet for $16. And then we used the CNC to create a pocket for the door with laser cut 1/8-inch steel. So you can see the handle is just incredibly simple, and you can cut out a bunch of those relatively inexpensively. So this was the door that we came up with that worked better than we thought. It actually worked really well. The next thing that's an issue with doing a house that's a solid panel is, where do you run systems? When you have cavities in a house, it makes it much easier, right, to run your electrical, your lighting, your HVAC. So that was a challenge. Luckily, we have 2 mechanical engineers on our team who really worked on this for a while, and also can we do it in a low-cost fashion. So you can see on the bottom left here, we have a window air conditioning unit that we've developed a special plug for that could accommodate a bunch of different sizes. So we're really using an off-the-shelf $500 AC that's much less than a mini split to be able to cool these. We're testing that right now with some mixing fans to make sure that we can maintain cooling, but something that's very inexpensive. If you need cooling, you can easily add it through the plug. The light switches are wireless because there are no cavities to run wire, or you'd otherwise have to mount a lot of conduit, which costs money. So my colleague came up with these wireless light switches that work quite well. And then we have an HRV in the beam space here that is drawing in fresh air and filtering it, with a couple of boost fans in our space. And then we're using this routed out MPP strip for electrical runs, so it's like a chaseway. And that can either be mounted at as a chair rail or as a wall base, which we've done here. And then lighting is just simple lighting, LED lighting that we got from a big box store. This is like shop lighting that we're using for uplighting. And you can see in the right that a couple of downlights, but mostly uplighting for this, which is quite simple and inexpensive. So I mentioned that we had a couple of issues, actually one issue. Everything went together really well, much easier than I thought. But where we did have an issue is where traditional construction supply chains met the precision of the MPP house, right? This is the entry door, which we ordered a couple of traditional, beautiful entry doors, they're fir. But we worked for 6 months with the supplier, giving them exact dimensions and shop drawings, which we approved. And then they just decided to build it based on a rough opening size and not the dimensions we gave them. So what we got was a gap here, right? Because we're not using a traditional rough opening. So we sent those back. They sent us the right size, and it actually went in incredibly quickly because that's a really square opening created by the CNC. So that was really the big hiccup. So kind of a fun story, I guess, and worth it for the story. So here are a few images of the house as we were going along. You can see I'm the person in the image, so for scale, that's kind of the height of these spaces. We worked on the finish. The finish is just a very simple whitewash finish from Timber Pro out of Portland. You can see a sample on the back of that up there. It's white with a lot of pigment. We try to do just one coat to reduce costs and see how that would work. So we're really trying to think about how can we even reduce the cost in the finish. Again, here's one of the upstairs bedrooms, which has polycarbonate sliders to connect with more light and privacy. This one might be used as an office in this space. And then the stair is kind of really a great moment. Here are some of the finished photos by Marcus Kaufman, where you can see the bedrooms, a lot of plywood. We're big fans of plywood. This could also, by the way, be done with CLT, once a smaller section of CLT is produced in the US. They do have a few in Europe and Canada. So we've started with MPP, but this could also be CLT. Here's the full bathroom upstairs on the left, and then the powder room down on the right. And then the kitchen, which is partly connected to the living and dining area down here. So again, just a kind of a wood aesthetic, which is biophilic and also antimicrobial, and reduces a lot of these costs. So in our next version, which we will have a 2.0, this is 1.0, we've tested a lot of these things. We might do this without doing the buildup of insulation, cladding, and doors in a factory, and just have the panels cut, kind of like a Sears kit-apart house, kit-apart's house, because that would allow us to create some connections from the exterior. You wouldn't see the angles that way. We could use less steel, and we could also explore doing the panels vertically so that we could reduce some of the steel straps that we had to create. So we're really working still on the next one to reduce a lot of the labor costs. And we'll see. The next one's going to be built by a commercial contractor, so we'll get costing. Instead of being in the lab, it's going to be outdoors where we will do a full suite of testing. We'll look at moisture. We'll look at infiltration, energy use over time. So we will do a whole battery of tests outdoors to really poke and prod on that one. We're really excited that we're working together with the Port of Portland as part of the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition, since they really want to get this type of fabrication on their T2 site in Portland. So we'll have a fabricator, we hope, that will adopt this. We're going to make the plans and the digital models publicly available. This is a publicly funded project, so we hope some of you in the room here might want to adopt it and use it on projects, and we'll have this available very soon. So with that, I really hope that we'll see some of these in Bend, Oregon very soon, and hopefully beyond. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentations, thought-provoking content, all about innovation. We're going to be able to dive into a few questions. I think we've got time for a handful here. I'm going to consult with my partner over here to make sure we get the mic into the hands so that the folks listening at home or after the fact can hear questions being asked. So raise your hand, and if you got a question, let's get a mic in your hand. Either one.
There you go. Hi, Mike. Andy Coughlin. I'm a structural engineer. My question is for Michael about the code changes that would be necessary for the types of construction that you presented. Obviously, there's like a parking minimums problem and like a multiple egress pathways, stairwell issue. What other code changes would be required to see that?
Hello? So the single stair is a big one. Like I said, in Oregon right now, you can do 3 stories. There is a group that's looking at doing higher. I was involved in some of the early discussions around that. I'm not sure, I haven't really been following the last couple of weeks where that ended up, but there are a number of organizations that are kind of looking at it from that side. Another one is elevators. I don't know if any of you saw Stephen Smith's really wonderful New York Times article on elevators and why they're so expensive in the US compared to like Switzerland, which is a country that has the same GDP, it's relatively wealthy people. Our elevators cost 2 to 4 times more, and it's part of it's labor, part of it's the way that they're designed. Every state has a different standard. Some states, I think, have different standards within the same state. And so it's kind of this issue, I think, it permeates into every code, right? So like the standards are all a little bit different than other places. The building codes are all a little bit different in other places. So it makes it difficult to take the same kind of thing. I think that's, who's the big CLT guys that went? Katera, right? Katera's problem, I think, was the building codes don't allow the exact same building in adjacent jurisdictions, right? So like what we could build in Seattle, we couldn't build in the next city over, or like what you could build in Bend, maybe like you couldn't do, it wouldn't be legal in Oregon. And that issue just kind of permeates every jurisdiction. I think also we have an issue where our building codes are written by a third-party corporation. In other countries, they're science-based. They're not written by a third-party corporation that has, board members of market or material product manufacturers sitting on it, or a certain kind of developer that only wants to build a certain way. And so I think that also plays kind of a part of it.
Hi, I'm a volunteer with Bend Yimby. I have a two-part question, actually. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the safety aspects of this, in the sense that a lot of European buildings are not built with wood, so there's that. And I also have a question of the audience. How many people here are going to go home and say, this is awesome, and going to write our state representatives and hopefully future State Senator Anthony Broadman and say, hey, we should do this?
So the safety one is an ongoing discussion. It's really interesting. There's the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Agency, held a single stair symposium today, I think in New Haven, today and yesterday. I haven't checked in with Stephen, who wrote the elevator report, who was also presenting the pro side on housing. What I would say is there's not a lot of consistency within the building code. So like the 50-foot dead-end corridor condition that I showed is actually not that safe. We also have in these big multifamily buildings these huge long corridors that fill up with smoke. A lot of our building is light framed. That's not necessarily true in Florida, where they require basically concrete or block for everything because of hurricane. New York City, Chicago, similar stories as well, but not for the same reasons. Europe, it's mostly mass, so like stone or concrete or block or brick, things of that nature. That is changing. There's a lot more mass timber that's going in the EU. A lot of places are moving towards bio-based products, so like those exterior straw bale or the prefab straw wall systems, exterior wall systems I was talking about. There's a single stair, unsprinklered skyrise in Germany that recently completed. It's mass timber. It's a composite on the floor, so the fire doesn't spread vertically, but the exterior is that straw-based component. So there's a lot of nuance into it. Part of it is that there are different building codes. There are different ways that we've historically built. But I think like with things like mass timber, right? Like it chars. It's going to not have those same issues. So there are ways around it. Some European countries require like a solid egress. So the staircase would have to be like concrete or CMU or something of that nature. And when you're going, taller, maybe the economics of it change a little bit as well. It's really funny though. So we require sprinklers for like a 3-unit building. Switzerland, there's a 33-story single stair concrete building, no sprinkler whatsoever, and it's not even in a major city, right? It's in the suburb of Geneva, and like the Swiss fire code and engineers, all simpatico. They're going to be building some single stair mass timber hybrid buildings as well. So the approaches are radically different. I think talking to legislators is a big one. In Washington State, we got legislators on board, but the process is not really democratically run once they start making the decisions. Like I said, like the Building Code Council, the ICC, has a board. A number of the board members are suburban developers. They're not like building these dense urban infill, and so like they don't really understand they don't see the connection between like, oh, okay, the way that we're doing things here is necessarily different. So there needs to be some kind of approach to coalesce those two. I'm hoping that the NFPA conversation today starts to move that a little bit faster.
Great question. We got a couple hands here.
Thank you. This is for Michael. Kathy Austin, architect. We've done a lot of work locally on revamping our zoning code on our planning commission, and I sit on the central or the core area advisory board. It's our redevelopment zone. So we've made some changes in there. And I'm curious what you're finding in terms of a whole different thing, insurance and banking, financing. I see those two areas being something that'd be very hard for me to change. I can work on zoning codes and building codes. Have you, the project that you showed where a number of families were working on developing something together, I'm wondering how they insured the building and how they got it financed. Can you address that?
Yeah, so in Germany, there are a number of development banks that are they understand the necessity of these kinds of housing. Germany also has a bit of a housing shortage, so they need housing. But these development banks, a lot of them are, they stem from the Marshall Fund, right? So we basically created these banks that are financing all of these wonderful, innovative projects. But we don't have development banks in the US. We have one cooperative bank, and their rates up until recently were just completely unworkable for anything. So finance is a big one. Insurance, so this is kind of, I tried to hint at this a little bit, but I think having like, and this is the approach we're looking at in Seattle, as a hybrid developer co-led, right? So the developer understands more of the risk and mitigation and can help address some of those issues. On the insurance side, this is my climate hat. Like, there's wildfires, 30 miles that way? Like, building dense, moderately resilient buildings in the city is going to be way better from an insurability standpoint than building sprawl further and further out. And as we're seeing in Washington and Oregon and California right now, like, that wildland-urban interface is no longer insurable. Insurance companies have trillions of dollars that they're on the hooks for. The state's not going to be able to pick that up. So this is like a much broader and larger conversation that we have to start having, I think, as a nation. It's not just community by community anymore. But that's all like I'm an architect, right? That's all like way above my pay grade. So I could talk a little bit about it, but like once you get into the weeds, my eyes just kind of like glaze over, and I'd like to look at, Swiss buildings.
Thought I saw a hand. Oh, yep.
Yeah, hi, my name is Ryan Starr. I'm an architect here in town. Real quick to clarify that, and then I have my real question. But the project that you showed with the families coming together, is that a co-op, or what exactly is that?
So the legal form, it varies a little bit. Like, you could do it as a co-op, and there are definitely co-ops that self-develop their own housing. What's really common is a GmbH, which is like the German version of an LLC. So basically, these people come together, they form their own LLC, and then the LLC develops the project. But it's not a market rate development, so they're just paying, the LLC, or they're buying units through the LLC in some form or other. So there are pathways to both. And like I said, I think that it's great that there are opportunities to do these multiple ways of developing housing. There's this really wonderful mass timber student housing project in Heidelberg, mass timber, passive house. It's the Mietshäuser Syndicate, which is another development model where it's renter managed, built, and owned with this specific one, and their units are like $300 a month. To live in this building it's student housing. So it's like you have a larger unit with 4 bedrooms and shared bathrooms, but it's like we're looking at like 5 times that for a crappy studio with vinyl everywhere in Seattle, right? So the economics of all of this are just they're so skewed in the US. And it's not one thing, it's 100 things. It's insurance, it's profit margins, it's labor rates, it's lack of competition. So how we start to have conversations around that is like, I try to tease it out in some of the book, but it's so complicated.
Thank you. And now my real question. The point access block, I'm sorry if my numbers are wrong, but if I remember right, in Oregon and the IBC, it's maximum of 3 stories, right? But is it Seattle or is it Washington, the entire state, where they have increased that? And then what does the process look like for Oregon to do something different than what the IBC says? Or, let's get crazy, Bend does something different.
So the IBC is 3 stories. Seattle, Honolulu, New York City are 6. The International Code Council writes the IBC, the International Building Code that all of our building codes are based off of. Some states don't actually use the IBC, they use NFPA. NFPA allows 4 stories of single stair. So Vermont uses the NFPA, so technically you could do a 4-story. So maybe like just to get one more story, like I don't know if there's like home rule kind of things, but that's some of the discussions that we've had with places where cities can kind of write their own code or modify their own code, is to say, look, we're gonna use NFPA instead of IBC. And I think that opens up a whole other can of worms too. Seattle's code has been in place for over 50 years. At first there was no height limit requirement. In the 80s, the city was completely downzoned, and that 6-story limit is kind of maintained. I worked with legislators in the state of Washington. They basically took, the intent was to take Seattle's legislation and copy it for every state, or every city jurisdiction in the state. The issue that you run into is like we have a professional fire department, we have adequate fire flow, so there's this code council committee, this tag that's meeting to kind of work with the state fire marshal, work with local jurisdictions, work with advocates, work with legislators to kind of hopefully find a pathway to allow an appendix version of this. So like if your city were to adopt mass timber regulations, right, or single stair regulations, like it's something that your city could do if they were really interested in. But the whole process, it's not ideal, right? The ideal process is like we go before the International Code Council and basically say, look, these are the reasons we should be doing this, because this is what everyone else in the world does, and you should do it too. But we're special and different, and so it's difficult to have these conversations about moving away from status quo. I mean, we see the same thing with zoning, right? Like no one wants to change the zoning. Everything has to stay the same. And then what happens? Your city can't grow. It's only wealthy people and elderly people who were living there before everything changed that can really afford to do it. So I think that we need to have these conversations and processes that allow for change and allow for innovation and the space for that. But currently we don't really have it. I don't know if that helps, but.
Well, as we can tell, the battle for housing innovation is a multi-front battle, and it warms my heart to be surrounded by folks who are willing to roll up their sleeves and lean in on innovation. But I got to call it there for the night. I want to again recognize our presenting sponsors, Hayden Homes, Pahlisch Homes, and the Ben Chamber, and all of our sponsors who make this event possible. If you want to continue to geek out with these two, go back to the bar, buy them a beer. But for tonight, I want to just remind that we're going to have our event again, the third and final lecture, October 15th. That'll be back at Open Space. Sorry, we had to change venues. Next year, we're going to try our best to keep them all in one place. But until October 15th, we really appreciate you all coming out tonight. And thanks again.